There will now be an opportunity for silent prayer or meditation. Please be seated. The Secretary will read the order.
Debate on vote number 42, Land Reform and Rural Development Appropriation Bill.
I will now recognize the Minister of Land Reform and Rural Development.
Ningaqhwabi nje nani extension yam. Chairperson, members of Parliament, distinguished guests, all the stakeholders who are providing us with so much support. It is a singular honor and privilege for me to address you today to present the Budget Vote 42 of the Department of Land Reform and Rural Development for the 2025-2026 financial year. This budget is a commitment to redress, equitable access to land for all, and to improving the lives of our people, especially those residing in rural areas. Land is a foundation of identity, dignity, and economic prosperity. Land is a key component of the factors of production. Therefore, without land, any aspiration of social economic development remains just that, aspirations. 30 years of democracy in our country, land reform and land ownership remain highly contested and emotive subjects. Without a doubt, land reform is an engine for propelling inclusive growth, for reducing poverty and unemployment, and for fostering the expansion of the national tax base. It is therefore with this in mind that we welcome the current trend of convergence in the national discourse on the land question among those of us who suffered dispossession and oppression. Sasikade sisedwa kule nto, siyavuya kuba sonke ngoku sithetha ngayo yomhlaba. Chairperson, we must never grow weary of reflecting on our past so that we may understand how we were as a country in order to move forward with greater clarity and purpose. The legacy of both violent and legislated dispossession is manifested in the poverty, inequality, and underdevelopment that still plague our communities to this date. The Native Land Act of 1913 was a calculated, cruel instrument and strategy of mass dispossession that consolidated the historical dispossession that our forebears fought bravely against, and it successfully entrenched racial segregation and economic inequality. This act restricted Africans to only 7% of the land, reserving the rest to white ownership. Indeed, this 7% was only later increased to 13% with the passage of the Native Trust and Land Act in 1936. Land reform must thus speak to the need to access land for residential, small-scale farming, industrial, grazing, recreation, heritage, conservation, and commercial agriculture. Therefore, the implementation of a meaningful land reform program requires a coordinated approach to enhance integrated and sustainable interventions. We thus wish to pay tribute to the Interministerial Committee of Land Reform chaired by the Deputy President for the role it plays in coordinating various efforts to avoid overlapping and duplication of functions related to land reform. This will enable us to accelerate efforts to address the land question of historically dispossessed communities and to support the poor and landless to access land. Chair, among the top priorities that we have been driving since we assumed office is the development of the Equitable Access to Land Bill and the Communal Land Tenure and Administration Bill, which will serve as key mechanisms to address the constitutional imperatives set out in Section 25, subsection 5 and 25, subsection 6, respectively. We will encourage South Africans to participate in the development of these historic pieces of legislation as they will redefine the legislative framework on access to land and on equitable basis. I have no doubt that this will be a subject of discussion during the national dialogue. We are on record in a number of forums as having emphasized that the delivery of land and the provision of support to the beneficiaries of all land reform programs are two sides of the same coin. A particular focus since taking office is to address the phenomenon of poor performance of land reform projects and inadequate pre- and post-settlement support for beneficiaries. Indeed, this is a concern that has also been raised by a range of stakeholders. The overall budget of the department for the 2025 financial year is 9.820 billion. Relative to the total allocation, land and tenure reform and restitution have received the largest share, amounting to 6.168 billion, or 63% of the total allocation. This demonstrates that our budget is grounded on our core mandate. The land redistribution and tenure reform branch has been allocated a total budget of 1.073 billion. With this budget, a total allocation of 559 million has been set aside to acquire and allocate 44,000 hectares of land. The department continues to process applications for awards of land to labor tenants, which were lodged not later than 31st March 2001. It should be acknowledged, though, that the area of tenure security for labor tenants, including the continuing spate of illegal evictions, remains an unacceptable situation. The department is implementing a comprehensive plan to address historically inefficiencies relating to the management of state land. This includes calling for accountability from some reluctant current officials and ensuring consequence management. Our department is also addressing the challenges related to communal property associations, particularly their dysfunctionality. To address this challenge, the department is implementing measures that include the establishment of an independent CPA office, which is currently headed by an acting registrar. Furthermore, a continuous process of training the executives of those structures on governance, financial management, land management, and related skills and capabilities is currently underway. A series of roadshows that will culminate with a CPA in Daba has also been planned for. The Commission on Restitution of Land Rights has been allocated a budget of 3.7 billion for the current financial year. The speed with which the claims are settled is heavily reliant on the allocated budget year on year. To address the challenge of expediting the pace of settling of old order land claims, that is, those lodged before the original cut-off date of 31st December 1998. The Commission is streamlining processes underwritten by new policies and standard operating procedures as part of an acceleration strategy. That said, however, additional financial and human resource will be required, and in general terms, we have to focus on enhancing the efficiency of the offices of the Land Claims Commission in the whole country. It is unacceptable that our rural areas continue to carry the burden of extreme poverty, disease, rampant criminality, including drug abuse, underdevelopment, and ignorance. This remains a blight on our constitutional promise of equality and prosperity. As a department, we are committed to work with our people in these areas to turn their misfortunes around, acting in solidarity with them, harnessing skills and capital for shared prosperity, and communicating unequivocally that the time for oppression is over and freedom is nearer. It should be borne in mind that rural development functional area, which in the budget for the current financial year has been allocated 891.7 million, or 9% of the total, is a multi-sectoral undertaking that should not be equated to agriculture, and that should also not be reduced or limited to the provision of basic services. Its critical objective is also to empower the inhabitants of the rural areas at the household and community levels to rise to an extent of becoming meaningful producers who can also engage in entrepreneurial initiatives and in a range of income-generating activities. All that we have to do is to provide the democratic space and essential tools to support these long-suffering communities to reach their full developmental potential. Chair, land administration has received 792.3 million, or 8% of the budget for 2025-2026. In line with the medium-term development program, our department's plan for 2025-26 financial year includes the development of framework known as the National Special Observatory, NSDO, which will provide a roadmap for establishing a centralized platform to track spatial planning implementation. It will also support data-driven decision-making. As part of our strategy driven to realize a spatial, just, and inclusive South Africa, the department is leading reforms and institutional programs aimed at strengthening spatial governance across all spheres of government. Similarly, a process of enhancing the participation of traditional and Khoisan leaders in spatial planning and land use management issues that is currently underway is gaining traction. The National Spatial Development Framework remains our long-term blueprint or reshaping spatial logic and guiding coordinated public investment towards equity, resilience, and productivity. Our efforts towards implementing the NDSF in the 2025-2026 financial year will include finalizing regional spatial development frameworks for Greater KwaZulu-Natal, the Greater Cape region, the Eastern Escarpment, and the Musina-Makhado Special Economic Zone, and convening a national regional planning conference to enhance intergovernmental and intersectoral spatial planning cooperation under this district development model. The National Geomatics Management Services maintains an integrated geospatial reference system, which is linked to the global reference system to secure accurate positioning. This is linked to the integrated survey system, which contributes to unambiguous positioning, speedy and orderly development, while the mapping and associated products facilitate sustainable development. As part of efforts to modernize land administration system, the department has taken a revamp of the cadastral information system. The base data sets produced and maintained by NGMS play a key role in land administration in the country, especially for land development and the promotion of security of tenure, as well as evidence-based planning. The network continuously operating global navigation satellite systems, reference stations called TRIGNET, allows for centimeter-level accuracy positioning across the country. The TRIGNET network has seen significant growth in users and applications, serving not just the surveying and construction sectors, but also increasingly finding applications in space, weather, precise agriculture, mining, and as well as rapid growing drone industry. South Africa, through the department, is also proud to be the host of the Africa Geodeck Reference Frame Data Center. The service makes GNS data from across African continent central accessible to all the various geodetic and scientific applications. The department will continue with systematic acquisition of high-resolution digital aerial imagery over the Republic, which is available as national geospatial infrastructure. The deeds registration generated. The implementation of electronic deeds registration marks a transformational leap in the modernization of our property registration systems. The EDRS system also promotes the interoperationality of e-government platforms and reduces the deeds registration turnaround times from 7 to 3 working days. From 1st August 2025, all conveyancers will be able to use the system after registering their profiles on the systems and can now lodge from anywhere in the country to the Special Registration Office without having to use a correspondent. The EDRS system will also facilitate the interface with various government departments and institutions, including the Department of Justice and Constitutional Developments, the Department of Home Affairs, and the Companies and the Intellectual Property Commission. This intervention will contribute immensely to reducing fraud and corruption. Chairperson, the entities of department, namely the Ingonyama Trust and the Office of Valuer General, have been allocated amounts of 22.847 million and 65.440 million respectively. In addition, we appreciate the need to strengthen our capacity to deliver on our mandate by creating a conducive environment for the employees of the department to perform their duties as expected. by, among other interventions, completing fit-for-purpose structure. In this financial year, the necessary resources will be delivered from the budget of 1.968 billion, or 20% that has been allocated under Program 1, that is administration. As a department, we are committed to work with our people in these areas to turn the misfortunes of our people around, so that one day we can recite the words of the poet Alfred Temba Kabula when he says, "The wheel is turning, and there shall be no mercy for those killing innocent children. The wheel is turning, freedom is nearer. Our strength and our dignity increasing. We shall conquer as the time for the oppressor is coming." As I conclude, I wish to take this opportunity to thank Deputy Minister, Comrade Stanley Matabata, the Acting DG, Mr. Clinton Heinemann, and the officials of the department for the support they've given me during my first year in office. Asante sana. Dabulela.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. Before I call on the following speaker, can I address honorable members? We know that when we have sessions, if you are from this side, when you move across the parliament staff, but we do not cross here in the center. So can we please adhere to those rules? And we need not to address that again. I will now recognize Honorable Adams.
Honorable House Chairperson, Honorable Minister, Honorable members of the PC, members of the House, and also the officials of the department, distinguished guests, and fellow citizens. Good afternoon. My theme for the land reform of rural development is land distribution, support ecosystem for sustainable economic production and food security. As I rise on this important occasion of the debate of budget vote 42 of the Department of Land Reform and Rural Development, I am reminded of the novel of renowned writer Ellen Barton in 1948, Cry, the Beloved Country, which paints the gaping racial and economic divisions that are threatening to split the country. This evidence of this racial and economic inequality obtains in the equitable distribution of land as a factor of economic production. This racialized inequality is not natural or consequences of racial superiority. It was engineered by successive regimes of colonial and apartheid system. Land dispossession and economic deprivation were systematically implemented by the abhorrent colonial apartheid regime. This is the legacy we must reverse, for this legacy continues to divide the country. The journey to reverse the legacy of not be uncontested by the beneficiaries of this unjust system. This is why we do not get surprised by maneuvers of the forces of reaction who run to the imperialist centers to oppose transformation. We make no apology in wanting to ensure that the land is shared amongst those who work for it. The restoration of land is to the rightful owners must be intensified. Hence, as the ANC, we declare our support for the implementation of the Expropriation Act, as well as the long overdue promulgation of the Equitable Access to Land Bill, which the department will introduce this year. Honorable House Chairperson, The Galema Motlanthe High Level Panel report identified sources of inequality being income, as asset and wealth inequality. Therefore, I want to underscore that land is a factor of production and is critical in addressing these sources of inequality. Productive land gives people income and assess basis on wealth. It is on this basis that we believe in the insignificance of the Equitable Access to Land Bill. We also firmly support the bill as we advances the findings of recommendations of the High Panel report, which argues that to ensure the land reform delivers the land rights set out in the Constitution, the panel recommends that Parliament enacts framework legislation that addresses the deficiencies of law and policy. No law currently exists to give meaning to or set standards for measuring whether land reform enables citizens to gain access to land on an equitable basis. Honourable Minister, we know that we are now under the conditions of the Government of National Unity, the GNU, Honourable Minister, and the shop stewards of the beneficiaries of the injustice law of apartheid will object and campaign against this bill. You have our support for the ANC to fast-track the processes of the land reform. As the ANC, we appreciate that this bill marks a departure from the previous land acquisition and redistribution bill, in that is not predicted on the market basis approach to land reform. In essence, this equitable access of land bill is grounded in Section 25 of the Constitution, which mandated equitable access to land. Honourable Chairperson, proactive acquisition is facilitated through the Agricultural Land Holding Account, ALA, as a training entity. It aims towards acquisition for strategically located land, provided financial and technical support to farmers, and ensuring that farmers with high commercial performance capability with support with adequate infrastructure to realize their potential. It targets is to acquire 200,000 hectares of farmland and provide financial and technical support to 93 farmers at an estimated cost of 3.1 billion rand over the next 5 years. Honourable Minister, we understand the need to be realistic, but to set a target of 200,000 hectares out of the required 5 million hectares over the same period, it falls far too short. I challenge you, Minister, to be a little more ambitious in this respect and revise the target upwards, make a dent on the backlog. Another critical institution is the context of land acquisition process in the Office of the Valuer General, which must implement the prescribe of the Property Valuation Act. It is the responsibility of the valuation of the properties transfer identified for land reform, and as well as monitoring and valuation for such properties. Chairperson, in our interactions with ALA, they indicated that the portfolio is not generating the expected revenue for lease rental. Therefore, there is an improved revenues. This obviously goes hand in hand with effective property administration. We implore you, Minister, to pay particular attention to improve the institutional and technical support ecosystem for proactive land acquisition program to strive the participate meaningful in the agro process, value chains and international markets. The land must never be allowed to fallen when there is such a great need for food production. Land distribution program is critical important to realization of the objective of building a growing and inclusive economy and employment. The land distribution program is a critical program for equitable access to land for women settlement and agriculture production processes. The department is limited in the overlapping. Now, the overlapping scope requires between Department of Land Reform and Agriculture needs to be harnessed to provide better support tailored to the need to the small and emerging black farmers. The Agriculture and Agro-Process Master Plan aims to boost food security by supporting active agriculture production capacity, particularly for small and emerging farmers. It requires investment to support growth and overall transformation for the agriculture sector. As I conclude, Honourable Chairperson, we must work hard to close the divide between large commercial agriculture, which is a result of mergers and market concentration to create monopolies in the agriculture sector. The agriculture companies of old...
Honorable Adams, your time has expired.
We support the budget vote of budget vote 40. As the ANC, we support. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will now recognize Honorable Mqatam.
Honorable House Chair, this budget vote is a betrayal of the landless. The MKP rejects this budget in total. We must tell the people of South Africa the truth. There is no plan to return land to its rightful owners. This budget vote is testimony to this claim. Our people must forget about land under this so-called GNU. The ANC under the GNU has stopped all pretenses of addressing the land question. The so-called GNU has given up, even achieving the limited 30% target of redistribution of agricultural land by 2030. This is a target set by the government's own National Development Plan. 30% of agricultural land was committed to be redistributed back to black people by 2030. We must ask, why not the full 100%? 30% is timid, showing the fear of land thieves, but that is the thinking of the GNU. We need to remind the nation that this 30% was first promised by the government of Nelson Mandela in 1994 through the Reconstruction and Development Program. The promise of the RDP was that 30% of agricultural land shall be redistributed to black people in the first 5 years. That was supposed to happen between 1994 and 1999. The very trusting President Mandela gave this task to an Afrikaner son of the land thieves, Derek Haneko, the first minister in post-1994, who betrayed Mandela and the nation by delivering only less than 1% of the targeted land redistribution by 1999. Worst, he developed the land reform program that is in place today, which is based on the willing buyer, willing seller principle. The same Hanekom, who has called the land expropriation without compensation nonsense. This was Mandela's mistake. We don't have to repeat it. The 30% agricultural land target set in 1994 has been pushed to 2030. The annual performance plans of the department commit to redistribute, listen to this, 200,000 hectares in the next 5 years. What is the hectares that are needed to be delivered to meet the 30% that we're complaining about? 14 million hectares. The department is planning to fail deliberately. How can you put a target of 200,000 when you need to meet 14 million hectares? So it is clear from this, and in fact, I should sit down after saying this, that the department has planned to fail. The department has no plan to meet the target set by the National Development Plan. No, I'm not going to sit down. I'm going to educate you. The lenders arbitrate. We say nothing about the new order restitution claims, which have not been touched. It might take up to 100 years to address those. The restitution program was the first piece of legislation of the Nelson Mandela government. It was based on the distortion of the land dispossession reality. The Restitution Act simply says blacks can only claim land lost after 1913. By 1913, Africans had already lost most of the land. That is why the MKP Private Members Bill seeks to put land dispossession to its correct date, 1652. So the cornerstone of the post-1994 land reform program was based on accepting the colonial land theft. This was further entrenched in Section 25 of the Constitution. That section, also known as the Property Clause, legitimizes land theft. It basically legalized the colonial land theft. Now, if you want our land back, we must buy it from the land thief. Minister, your new pieces of legislation are not going to be able to give us land back because the theft is entrenched in the Constitution. Until you amend Section 25, you are not going to be able to do anything to redress the land question. This is just time-wasting mechanisms once more. The Restitution Act is aimed, you are a land thief or supporter of land thieves. The Restitution Act is
Point of order, Chairperson. Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, the Speaker just called me specifically a land thief. He referred to me calling me a land thief. I've never stolen land. The land that I've got, I've bought. He must please retract that statement. Thank you.
Honorable Member, I did not hear the Speaker on the podium identifying a name and saying, Honorable Member, so and so, you are a thief. So he was rephrasing his own speech, and because of there's no identification, we cannot then sustain that order. Please continue, Honorable Kutam.
It's fit.
If the shoe fits, wear it proudly. The Restitution Act is aimed at addressing the calamity of 1913 Land Act. Whites have shown their true nature of being inhumane. Imagine, they created a fake majority in a whites-only parliament to enact an evil piece of legislation that they called the Native Land Act of 1913. The progeny of the British and the Boere made peace on the blood and dispossession of Africans. Thieves fighting each other over the stolen bounty decided it was best to unite on the backs of Africans and find peace on a piece of stolen land. The Boere and the Brit are equally guilty of land theft. So brutal was the impact of the Land Act that Sol Plaatje was to observe that on the day after the enactment of the Act, natives woke up, and I quote, not only slaves, but pariahs in their land of their birth, close quote. 30 years later, after democracy, black remains pariahs in the land of their birth. The colonizers went into a parliament of land thieves and without shame decided to take 97% of the land to themselves. And only later did they take 87%. Land thieves are adamant that they are keeping the land, and the GNU is doing nothing to return the land to its rightful owners. Farm workers and labor tenants are not even mentioned in these plans of the department. These are slaves who produce food for the export markets, but they themselves are hungry. What an evil system. Landlessness creates vulnerability. The landless build their homes in areas prone to be flooded. The landless have no protection of the law. That is why white farmers can murder and feed them to their pigs. Landlessness breeds hunger and indignity. We learn from Frantz Fanon, and I quote, "For a colonized people, the most essential value, because it is the most concrete, it is first and foremost the land which will bring them bread and above all, dignity." The systematic refusal to return land to black people provides license to white racism. This
Honorable
refusal,
Mkhatama, your time has expired.
the MK party reject this budget.
Thank you. The next speaker, I now recognize Honorable Matikizela.
Chairperson. Oh,
Before you raise a point of order, you raise your hand. So I can't recognize you because once you open your mic, which means I can not recognize you. Honorable Nana.
thank you very much, Chairperson. Out of respect, I did not want to interrupt Honorable Mkhatama. I have realized that some members in the gallery are taking part in this debate. It is customary that members in the gallery are not supposed to take part. Please can you look into that. Thank you.
The people that are in the gallery, whether it's officials or officials of political parties, you are not honorable members of parliament, so you are not part of the debate. Can you please refrain from clapping hands or making any sounds? You are here on our discretion, so please respect that. Thank you very much. Continue, Honorable Matikizela.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Chairperson, colleagues, the Minister and the Deputy Minister in his absence. House Chair, the land question has dominated political landscape before and after the advent of democracy. One would assume that this issue would be treated as a top priority, not only to address past injustices through restitution, but to also correct the deeply skewed patterns of land ownership that still persist. The national government budget stands at 2.58 trillion for this financial year and is projected to reach 6.69 trillion over the MTEF period. Yes, this crucial department has been allocated a mere 9.8 billion, or just 0.3% of the total budget. While I'm fully aware of the country's fiscal constraints, Madam Chair, this measly allocation clearly reflects a lack of political will to tackle one of South Africa's most urgent historical and developmental challenges. The high-level panel report, that was chaired by former President Kgalema Motlanthe, made it abundantly clear that the failure of land reform is not due to constitutional constraints, as some would like us to believe, but rather to poor implementation, corruption, and lack of agency by successive previous governments. That sobering truth still holds even today. For over 30 years, Madam Chair, government has failed to resolve 80,000 old order claims, and some of my colleagues have spoken about this. Now, We have over 5,400 remaining old order claims requiring about 70 billion rands to finalize. At the current pace and with the current budget, it will take no less than 30 years to complete just those claims. Now, between 2014 and 2016, more than 163,000 new claims were lodged. Now, this backlog means that the old order claims combined with the new order claims will take no less than 100 years to resolve them. Now, that is not an indication of a government that is serious about such a crucial issue. Through you, Speaker, Minister, I urge you to convene a land reform acceleration in Daba and invite both social and potential funders to explore creative ways to find financing model for this crisis. Because as things stand, relying solely on government grants has turned this into a pipe dream. When the Interim Protection of Informal Land Rights Act was introduced in 1996, nearly 30 years ago, the expectation was that government would swiftly initiate legislation to give effect to Section 25(6) of our Constitution, as you rightly said. This section compels Parliament to ensure that people in rural areas enjoy security of tenure so that they can own the land that they reside on. After the withdrawal of the Communal Land Rights Act, which is CLARA, the Communal Land Tenure Bill was introduced in 2017. 8 years later, still no agency to finalize it. It's one of the bills that you've mentioned, Minister, and would want this bill to be sped up. So I want to urge you, then, Minister, that please liberate our people. Let them become landowners, not just tenants of the state. Let them participate in a property market that is worth trillions. Let us create a tenure system that attracts investment, grow the rural economy, and foster entrepreneurship and job creation in rural areas. Minister, through you, House Chair, let us be honest. South Africa does not have a comprehensive rural development strategy. What we have is a patchwork of isolated projects managed by different departments with little coordination, with no impact. These fragmented efforts do not amount to real development. Rural municipalities are struggling. They cannot even collect sufficient rates or generate local revenue. The recently introduced COCTA bill aimed at restructuring municipal funding, I'm afraid, will not solve the problem. What we need is a cohesive outcome-based rural development framework. Land tenure reform must play a leading role in this. We need to use land as an asset to attract investment and generate capital. When individuals own their land, they gain leverage, they can lift themselves out of poverty and transform their communities into thriving economic hubs. And as we have seen with the challenges in Ingonyama Trust as well, Minister, your intervention is very, very important there, because with the current legislations that pit the Minister and His Majesty, which result in ordinary people suffering, who should be benefiting from that, those people will not see the benefits as long as you still have the existing legislations that are governing Ingonyama Trust. House Chair, since 1995, over 5.3 million hectares of land has been redistributed to more than 315,000 beneficiaries. Many of these people have formed communal property associations or CPAs. Currently, there are 1,748 CPAs operating across the country. Given the value and scale of land and resources these communities manage, it is now essential to appoint an independent body or service provider to assess the status and functionality of these CPAs. Because the truth is, many of them are dysfunctional. Few CPAs that have partnered with experienced commercial farmers and secured finance are the only ones that seem to be making progress. There are serious gaps in post-settlement support as well, which leaves members vulnerable to manipulation extortion and exploitation by a small group of politically connected individuals, often at the expense of broader community who are rightful beneficiaries. And I also do not believe, Minister, that the recent amendments to the CPA Act are moving in the
Honorable
right direction.
Matekizela, your time has expired.
We begrudgingly support this budget, Minister, but please resolve these challenges that we spoke about.
Thank you. Honorable Matias.
Thank you so much, Honorable House Chairperson. E re ke dumedise Mopresidente wa rona Commander-in-Chief Julius Malema, mookamedi wa mabotho mohale wa marumo, Petso wa Majweng, Makataule wa kgoro di katilwe, moshabi wa marumo. House Chair, let me speak plainly and with urgency. Land reform in South Africa is in crisis. There is an urgent need for a coherent agrarian strategy. And unless we take bold, coordinated and honest steps, we're at risk of betraying the Freedom Charter's aspiration that call for everyone to share in the country's wealth, for the land to be shared among those who work it, and for all to have work and security and be treated equitably with dignity. These aspirations are articulated through the 7 non-negotiable cardinal pillars of the EFF Founding Manifesto, particularly the expropriation of land without compensation for equal redistribution. The high-level panel chaired by the former president told us what we already know, that there is no coherent legal framework for land reform in this country. Instead of one unified strategy, we have a mess of fragmented, outdated, and conflicting laws zigzagging from one ministerial term to the next. We have programs that don't talk to each other, departments that pull in different directions, and officials who are unclear about their mandates. We cannot continue like this. Land reform must be embedded into a wider agrarian reform strategy, not as a side issue, but as a heartbeat of rural transformation. We need a bold, holistic approach that brings together land infrastructure, finance, extension services, food production, incentivization, and justice into one vision for rural South Africa. Ergbare Boshoff, laat ek vir jou nou sê. Ons benodig saamhoudelike benadering vir landwyde verspreiding en landbouontwikkeling, nie oranje. Let me now speak of distribution. Constitutional obligation under Section 25, with the false promise that it will enable land transformation, is nothing else but fiction. It shall not be realized. For 2025-2026, the department has budgeted 6.1 billion of land for land reform and restitution. But when we strip that away through inflation, the real increase is about 3.3%, a drop in the ocean. Can we honestly say we are serious about redistribution with such numbers? To meet the 2030 target, the state will need to acquire 15 million hectares in land for the next 5 years. Where is the plan to achieve this? Where is the strategy? We are being taken for a ride. And all of the while, land prices keep rising as land is held for holding and speculative purposes, making acquisition harder every year. Redistribution by 2030 is becoming a pipe dream, and we are watching it slide through our fingers. Comrades on this side, every time we raise the crisis of redistribution, some racist fanatics and apartheid apologists, all of them coalesced in the GNU, wave the Expropriation Act in our faces like it's a magic wand. Let us be clear, there is no legal framework in place for expropriation without compensation because of the ANC treasurer's capitulation. The regulation and administrative systems needed to implement the Act are nowhere to be found and will not be introduced anytime soon. The Minister of Public Works and Infrastructure must act with urgency to introduce these regulations. Further delay undermines the credibility of the entire reform agenda. As we speak now, over 5,400 of pre-1998 claims remains unresolved out of 80,000 submitted. The reopening of the claims in 2014 led to 160,000 new claims. This program must be phased out as it saves no progressive cost because it is purpose and fit, creates unrealistic expectation, and leads to capture by elite interest. The department plans also diminishes the constitutional status of tenure reform in terms of Section 25, subsection 6. There are no measurable targets and indicators for communal tenure reform and land tenure claim settlements, despite the Valase Constitutional Court ruling and the appointment of the special master, and the Rahube Court judgment that protects and addresses the plight of tenure for women in urban areas whose tenure rights is vulnerable and insecure due to past racially discriminatory laws. Similarly, women's rights to equality for conversion purpose of land rights in terms of ultra continue to be violated. Honorable Minister, time for tinkering at the edges is over. We urgently need a state custodianship of land bill, which will decisively resolve once and for all the land and ownership question. A state custodianship of land bill that will be anchored on the bold integrated agrarian reform strategy, one that centers the landless, the rural poor, and the human and the peasant workers. Let us move with speed, clarity, and conviction. Let us build a rural economy that uplifts the majority of our people and not the privileged few. We ought to envision the possibility of the impossible, because land reform is not just about hectares. It's about restoring hopes, justice, and the future of this nation. Mwafrika Nyonso, how can you be remembered after your tenure? It is not by shouting slogans such as
Honorable Matias,
Izwe lethu, but it's by expropriating the
your time is
land.
expired.
Let me tell you now, because your budget
Honorable
offers
Matias.
nothing, the EFF rejects it with the contempt it deserves.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I'll now recognize Honorable Ngwango.
Honorable Chairperson, Honorable Minister, and honorable colleagues, the IFP rises to note the crucial need for a land reform as it carries the weight of our country's historic injustices, yet still holds the promise of inclusive growth and meaningful redress. The 2025-26 total budget allocation for the Department of Land Reform and Rural Development of 9.82 billion reflects an increase of 8.13% compared to the adjusted 2024-2025 budget of 9.08 billion. While this increase is welcomed, the IFP has noted with concern that this allocation represents only 0.3% of the total national appropriation for 2025-2026. This suggests that land reform and rural development continue to be under-prioritized in the broader national agenda, despite their critical importance in addressing poverty, inequality, and deeply entrenched spatial injustices of our past. Land reform is not just about transferring hectares. It is about restoring dignity, correcting historical injustice, and unlocking economic participation for the majority. Yet, many land reform beneficiaries continue to face systemic failure due to inadequate post-settlement support, poor infrastructure, and limited market access. We note the department's commitment to socio-economic development and job creation in rural areas. However, in practice, rural communities remain structurally excluded from the mainstream economy. Infrastructure backlogs, youth unemployment, and poor service delivery are still the defining features of rural life in many provinces. The IFP calls for rural development to be elevated from a policy ambition to a budgeted, measurable, and well-coordinated national priority. Regarding the Ingonyama Trust Board, the IFP reaffirms its support for the role of traditional leadership in custodianship of communal land. We remain vigilant against any attempts to undermine customary land tenure or the cultural integrity of rural communities. At the same time, we support stronger financial governance within the ITB, the Ingonyama Trust Board, in line with the findings of the Auditor General. Transparency and accountability must go hand in hand with protection of traditional land rights. In conclusion, Honorable Chairperson, the IFP supports this budget vote, and we insist on stronger delivery, deeper transformation, and more consistent political will. Let this budget reflect where land reform is a lived reality, not just for the policy books, but for the people on the ground. I thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member. I will now recognize Honorable Van Wyk.
Magtiging vir ons mense. Ons ondersteuning kom egter met 'n versoek vir aanspreeklikheid, deursigtigheid en 'n streng nakoming om die korrekte bewilliging van fondse. Die rede vir hierdie vereiste is, soos ek vroeër aan die huis bekend gemaak het, dat daar is gemeenskappe in ons land wat nie voordeel gekry het wat hulle toekom. Ons het plekke in ons land, soos Richtersveld, Steenkof, Knofnikskraal, Botanie, Oppermansgronde, wat nog nooit ondersteuning gekry het in die land nie. Land reform is not merely a policy, it's a moral and a constitutional obligation to redress the injustices of the past and ensure that our people and the historical disadvantage have access to productive land for sustainable livelihoods. The success of this budget depends on the figures, not only on the figures allocated, but on the effective corruption-free implementation of projects that truly uplift rural communities. Therefore, the Patriotic Alliance calls on the department to ensure, one, strict financial oversight, that every rand allocated to land redistribution, agriculture support, and rural infrastructure is spent according to the intended purpose, with zero tolerance of mismanagement of funds. Twee, projectgebaseerde aanspreeklikheid. Hierdie befondsing is gekoppel aan 'n meetbare inkomste met 'n gereelde parlementêre verslagdoening oor vordering, uitdagings en regstellingsaksies. 3, gemeenskap betrokkenheid. Dat begunstigdes en landelike gemeenskappe actieve deelnames aan die ontwikkelingsproses is om te verseker dat projekte aan hulle werklike behoeftes voldoen eerder as om die politieke en die elite belange te dien. The Patriotic Alliance supports the budget because we believe in land justice and rural development. With this, thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Member. The next speaker will be the Honorable Boshoff.
Thank you, Honorable House Chair, Honorable Minister, and Honorable Chairman. I'm going to speak some English today. Now, the mandate of this department is to put right the past with an amount of about 10 billion rand a year. quite impossible, actually, but that is the mandate. Now, if we want to put something right, we have to say what is wrong. And I would like to start this narrative or this story at 1994, when the present settlement, according to which we are functioning at the moment, was constituted. Now, that settlement actually brought the majority of South Africans and the minority who used to rule the country to a point in which they had to settle with one another on politics and land. What the majority had to come to terms with is if they wanted the power immediately, they would have to accept the slow reform of land. The minority, on the other hand, said, well, we can give away our self-determination, our freedom as such, because at least we retain our property. That's what they decided. A very dishonorable decision from the minority at that stage to say we trade our freedom for property. Now, at that stage, Afrikaners as a nation, as a collective, was actually deconstituted. It brought along the end of minority rule, which is a good thing. That should have happened long ago. But it came at a certain price. And that price is that no land in South Africa is white land anymore or Afrikaner land anymore. It is just individual land of people who happen to speak Afrikaans and to go to an Afrikaans church and to have the... It is indeed legally the truth. Now, what is evolving at the moment for South Africa is an Afrikaner problem. Because the narrative is that Afrikaners are nothing but land thieves who contributed nothing to South Africa but oppression. That has been verbalized repeatedly today. Now, if you ask the Germans about the Jews about the 1930s in Germany, when you are criminalized as a nation, as a cultural group, as an ethnicity, then you are very near to danger, and that is time to secure yourself. Now, there are two ways in which we can secure ourselves. We can entrench individual ownership, individual property, and that is what's happening, and that's what's frustrating the land reform process. The other possibility is to entrench ourselves as a collective, to recognize our own collective identity, and to demand recognition of our collective identity as Afrikaners, also with a right to land. Now, there are some problems in the world which can only be solved by self-determination. The Sahrawi problem in Morocco, the Palestinian problem in Israel, and the Afrikaner problem in South Africa can only be solved by... I am from Africa, and I have the freedom, and I demand it.
Thank you, Honorable Member. The next speaker will be Honorable Letrape.
Chair, how do I follow a speech like that, Chair? Chair, Minister, and all the officials here. You know, I ask myself a question as a descendant of indigenous people. Were we ever owners of land? Because in the program that you see, we talk about tenants, we talk about laborers, we talk about farm dwellers, but you never talk about landowners. And I come from a royal family that were landowners, that were custodians on behalf of a community, that put in a land claim in 1995, and we're still waiting. Because suddenly, you can't claim under the basis of being an owner. You can only claim on the basis of having been a laborer, a dweller, or a tenant. And that is where the problem lies. So the discussion needs to be reset. And I hear about the conversation and the terms of reference of 1994. And 30 years later, we've seen that that takes us nowhere. We need to get back to the table and recognize that Africans were owners. And you cannot start where suddenly we are dwellers, we are tenants, we are laborers. There's something wrong with that discussion, Minister. And it needs to be reset. And we have to understand that we had African civilizations. And under African leadership, land is priceless. It is therefore allocated for productive use, not for ownership, and you sit on it and you don't produce for the nation. So we had an advanced civilization. And if you can't go back to humanizing us as Africans, this problem will never be solved. Now, in the values of where I come from, the royal family are custodians, not owners. They are custodians on behalf of the tribe. And they deal with land properly and appropriately. Now, the issue of today is that under the current rules and reforms, the only Africans that are getting fed on the land issue are the officials. So I say to you, Minister, we need lifestyle audits on all officials at national and provincial level. Now, in terms of our constitution, everything says refer back to the constitution. One of the things that need to be part of the discussion is the fact that there can be no restoration of land and land rights without reformation. Our constitution talks about human rights, gender equality. Now you will see that when there's land reform, women are left behind. When there's discussions on land issues, where I come from, they say, Basadi abatle khotle. So we need to ensure that as we fix the issue of land, women are recognized. We have many single mother households. Why can't they own land? How do we move forward if we do not recognize and restore rights to women? So, Minister, for us to support this, you've got to make those major reforms. So in its current form and with your current mandate, we cannot support it, but make it right, recognize women, recognize Africans as owners, and then we can talk. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Letlape. The next speaker is Honorable Ghana.
Na kenza mtramashtu. Fanen shawatana mamkaul. Holod. Kulava kamsava. Misava irfu. Misava irfu. Loko Dr. Honorable Letlape blah blah. Antrangeti ngobanyika extra 3 minutes so that he can continue. Because sometimes we forget about where we come from. There is that temptation to think that that which was done over centuries can be undone in 30 years. This afternoon, I want to rise for the families who were removed from District 6 as a child and have never seen the loss of a childhood home and their family land be recognized. I rise for the farmers in the Eastern Cape who have given their life to a communal farm but have no security of tenure. I rise for all those who have been left behind and forgotten by our land reform restitution. As Rise Mzansi, we remain committed to building a safe, prosperous, equal, and united South Africa. But we can only prosper We can only prosper if and when we address the inequalities of our past, and a key way to do so is through land reform. As author and agricultural economist Mr. Wandile Slobo has said, the current agricultural land reform regime has seen its successes. However, as long as it continues to treat land reform as a group project, it will not succeed in empowering rural farmers. We have seen several instances where the state acquires land and leases it to a group of black farmers. However, this leaves farmers without the security of title deed and disincentivizes them from investing in the land. We need to rethink, Minister, we need to rethink the cooperative model and place more trust in individual farmers. Additionally, the state of land restitutions, as you'll know, it is deplorable. How is it that 31 years later, we are still processing land claims instituted under the Restitution of Land Act? How is it that with the current budget allocations, it will take another 30 years before the remaining 5,400 claims are settled? That is not even addressing the claims instituted after 1998. We must not only see land reform as a rural matter or the exclusive jurisdiction of this department. We need to reorientate spatial planning to take account of the rate and nature of urbanization. To further empower people, it should be the norm that every stand, rural or urban, must have pipe water to enable sanitation and food production. Let us act now to bring liberation to those who have been left behind. Let us act now to restore, Minister. Let's restore what was lost and to empower the rural farmers. Councillor Mtramashtul.
Okay, Honorable Ghana. The next speaker will be from the UAT.
Thank you, Chairperson. Khotso, Ma-Afrika. Let me start congratulating the Deputy Minister on the journey he's taking. We are gathering here today to debate not just a budget, but a very soul of Africa, the land. The budget 42 revealed the continued betrayal of the landless. The department may be allocated billions, but it is not guided by a revolutionary purpose. Justice is delayed, distorted, and denied because the land remains in the hands of the few and the pain of the majority deepens. Let me state without ambiguity, as long as 1913 remained the benchmark for land reform, the United African Transformation will never support a government that pretends to answer the land question while preserving the colonial land architecture. Furthermore, weak institution capacity sabotaging transformation from within. The department suffers from high vacancy rates at senior management, including prolonged absence of the permanent Director General, delays in finalizing fit-for-purpose organizational structure, and a non-functional office of the Communal Property Association, leaving the land beneficiaries abandoned without government support. How do we expect the land reform to succeed when the very institutions meant to lead are in disarray? The land acquisition program underperformed yet again. In 2024-2025, the department targeted 120,000 hectares and managed far less. The reliance of the willing buyer, willing seller model, it is not just flawed, it is a neoliberal fig leaf that protects white privilege at the expense of African majority. We should ask who benefited from the farm allocation, what criteria was used, how much was paid, and where that money went. The restitution of land rights continue to be a painfully slow. Thousands of claims remain unresolved decades later. Despite budget increase, it is not money we lack, it is a
political will and ethical leadership. Chairperson, land is not just about agriculture. It is about identity, sovereignty, and spiritual belonging. Without the land, there is no true freedom. As the UAT, we call for amendment of Section 25 and the removal of 1913 as a benchmark. Our land reform program is confronted by crony capitalism, which will further deprive the true subaltern interest. The full operationalization and resource of the Office of the CPA and the Rural Land Institution. Fast-track settlement on land claims with robust post-settlement support.
Kanimambo, your time is up.
Kanimambo.
Kanimambo. I'm chairing Honorable Kaula, not you. The next speaker will be Honorable Nana.
Honorable Chairperson, honorable members, good afternoon. I rise on behalf of the Democratic Alliance in this important debate of Budget Vote 42 to affirm our unwavering support to meaningful, just, and empowering land reform. But I must begin by sounding an alarm of a troubling regulatory development, Minister, one that risks undermining the very principles of dignity, freedom, and equality that should guide land reform in a post-apartheid South Africa. I refer to the regulation that compels individuals to declare their race and gender when transferring land, a measure as draconian as it is unnecessary. In fact, it reeks of every bureaucratic racialism that once defined our darkest past. Let us remind this House and the country that land dispossession in South Africa was legalized and enforced through a battle of apartheid and colonial laws. Forcing South Africans in 2025 to disclose their race and gender when transferring land does not advance redress, Minister. It undermines it. It treats citizens not as individuals with rights and dignity, but as a demographic categories in a spreadsheet. This is not transformation, it is regression. The mandatory requirement to disclose race and gender as a precondition for exercising one's right must be rejected outrightly. This new regulation uncomfortably smacks of an apartheid era during which South Africans were subjected to mandatory racial classification for purposes of discrimination, control, and exclusion of the majority of the population. We are now 31 years into the democratic dispensation. It is disheartening and regrettable to see similar mechanisms being reintroduced, even though under a different pretext and ostensibly different objectives. While we acknowledge the importance of an accurate and comprehensive land ownership data to inform government policy and ensure the equitable transformation of land ownership patterns in our country, the inclusion of race and gender as mandatory disclosure requirement in a property transfer process warrants careful consideration, as these may violate individual dignity, privacy, and constitutional rights. Surely, at this day and age, there is a lot of other mechanisms that can be used to collect data without violating citizens' constitutional rights. We must ask a question: how can we claim to be building a non-racial society whilst we are introducing compulsory racial identification into our property laws? Honorable members, the DA believes that land reform must focus on outcomes, not on identities. we must assess success by not how many people, we must assess success by how many people have secure title or tenure, especially for rural women and labor tenants. How many farms are productive, sustainable, and supported with infrastructure and financing they need to thrive? How many communities benefit from access to land for homes, farming, and opportunities? The department's continued obsession with race-based metrics, Minister, whilst state-owned land lies underutilized and the restitution claims remain unresolved, is a distraction from the real reform. The DA says yes to redress, but no to racial reclassification. I do realize that my colleagues, the diminishing so-called progressive caucus, has been quite well behaved today, and Shem, I do realize that they are feeling the cold outside the GNU, and they will be outside of that GNU for quite a while. You will remain outside and feel the cold. Chairperson, let me be clear. The DA supports land reform, but
Thank you.
the DA
Honorable.
supports land reform, but not when it is administered through unconstitutional, divisive, and
Honorable Nana.
outdated tools. The
The
DA,
next speaker.
as Mbuchana said, supports this budget.
Honorable Nana, thank you. The next speaker will be Honorable Mkhaha.
Honorable Chair, Honorable House Chairperson, honorable members, distinguished guests, fellow South Africans. I must also salute the former members of the African National Congress here and the secret members of the African National Congress in this House. On these occasions of the debate of Budget 42 of the Department of Land Reform and Rural Development, I rise on behalf of the African National Congress to support the budget. This budget is a stepping stone in the journey of reversing centuries of grave and dehumanizing injustice. Let us be clear, the entire process of land dispossession was extremely vicious, violent, and also systematic. It was the colonial settlement and expansionism of the settlers into the eastern frontier and the interior that precipitated the brutal wars of resistance. Following the 9 frontier wars, land dispossession was codified into law through the Glen Grey Act of 1894, and that was sponsored by the governor of the Cape and the mining baron, Cecil John Rhodes. The Glen Grey Act curtailed the extent of land and cattle ownership by natives, and I suppose this one is responding to what Honorable Boshoff raised here. It therefore can be considered a forerunner to and a template of the Native Act of 1913. Let us take this moment on logic of the Glen Grey Act as expressed by Cecil John Rhodes during the debate in the Apartheid Cape Parliament. He said, and I quote, "My idea is that the natives should be kept in these native reserves and not be mixed with the white man at all. Are you going to sanction the idea, with all the difficulties of poor whites before us, that these people should be mixed up with white men and white children grow up in the middle of native locations, in the interest of white people themselves, who must never let this happen?" In the interest of these white people, we must never let this happen. White labor cannot compete with black labor in this country. Physical labor, I mean, close quote. So the racist philosophy of subjugating natives and keeping them landless was firmly intertwined with the interest of capital to have access to an army of cheap labor in the reserves, what we call today our rural areas. In short, this was a process of dispossession, de-aggregation, and pluralization to serve the racist and accumulation interest of capital. The duty to reverse this historical and legitimate grievance of restoration of land to the indigenous people rests on the shoulders of the liberation movement, to restore the dignity of land ownership and the dignity of the working land. We must underline that the liberation movement does so under vastly different conditions, that is, entrenched capitalist mode of production and the judicial system based on Roman Dutch law. In the democratic dispensation, the government adopted a program of land restitution as an integral component of the overall land reform process. From the outset, the government set a modest target of 30% for land redistribution in the first 5 years. This was a cautious approach, and resultantly, this target was not met and remains a target of the NDP by 2030. The evident constraint that curtails progress is twofold. That is the entrenched capitalist mode of production and the malicious use of judicial system to contest the claims and also the land value. The land value process is embedded in the capitalist mode of thinking, hence the escalating or highly inflated land price, which undermines the progress in terms of land reform. In this vein, academics Wandile Sihlobo and Professor Johan Kirsten argued that since 1994, approximately 13.2 million hectares, amounting to 17%, has been transferred. And if you add the 2.3 million hectares successfully earmarked for restitution, but beneficiaries opted for financial compensation as a means of restitution, then the equivalent is 20% of land restored. As lawmakers, we must ask hard questions and problematize the method of land reform as a whole. But the question of land constitutes the original sin against the black majority in this country. And the African National Congress was aware, hence it embarked on various vigorous struggles challenging the forces of darkness against our people. To be clear, Chairperson, lest I be misunderstood, there is modest progress in the land restitution program. There are thriving black emerging farmers from restituted farms, and there are successful communal property associations that are producing a diverse range of products for domestic and foreign markets. What we seek to underline as the ANC is that these success stories need to be multiplied and be scaled. This leads to the financial withdrawal of the department to advance land restitution. The land reform and restitution budget under Program 3 shows an increase from an adjusted appropriation of 5.7 billion in 2025-2026 to 6.1 billion in 2025-2026 financial year. This reflects a nominal increase of 8.19% or 3.34% in real terms after adjusting for inflation. The restitution process program received the largest share, consuming 59% of the program's budget, followed by the land redistribution and tenure reform sub-program at 21%. We acknowledge that the land reform receives the lion's share of the budget, and concomitantly, the restitution process program enjoys 59% of the overall allocation. To finalize a targeted 844 land restitution claims, 11.6 billion over the medium term is allocated in the restitution program, in the land reform and restitution program. However, it must be stressed that it remains insufficient to overcome the backlogs of pre-1998 claims. In this vein, Honorable Minister, the Commission for Restitution Land Rights, as captured in the revised strategic plan, indicates that, close quote, open quote, the CRLR has a total of 5.719 old order claims as of 30 September 2024. All these claims need to be processed for settlement. The 5.719 outstanding pre-1998 claims would cost approximately 46 billion, excluding the running cost of the Commission. This is a mountain to climb, given the challenges we have indicated, particularly on highly inflated land practices. The land first and foremost is a factor of production, and therefore its ownership and control define social relations of production. We must improve the land reform delivery instrument and put measures in place to prevent the practice of restituted land being systematically captured or returned through dubious means to previous owners, thus frustrating transformation agenda. We must urgently establish and operationalize the register of CPAs to protect and advance the benefit of restoration of land in our country. Honourable Minister, the President had already charted the path to resolve the land reform deadlock when he announced the need to establish the Land Reform and Agricultural Development Agency. And that's the solution, and that's what we must exploit. Bold steps are required, and as the ANC, we implore the government to increase the budget allocation for the land reform. Let us now turn our attention to agrarian question, which is also a long outstanding.
Thank you very much. Your time is up.
Sindile benzofuna ndiresponde kwabantu bethetha apha ngoku. Laa nto yoba ndipractice rejection xa ndilala every day. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. The next speaker will be the Minister of Land Reform and Rural Development.
Inkomo. Thank you, Honorable Chair. Honorable Adams, we appreciate your emphasis on the need to intensify transformation, particularly in the areas of land restitution and equitable access. We also acknowledge your challenge regarding the expansion of the land acquisition target within the current fiscal envelope. The department will explore feasible options to increase the number of hectares procured in alignment with our constitutional and programmatic obligations. Ndizawugqibela ngawe, Vice Biko, Matama. Honorable Madikizel, we appreciate your observation that land reform requires greater financial investment. The department stands ready to effectively deploy any future budget increase to advance land tenure security and development. We will consider your proposal for a land reform acceleration in Daba, and we are already acting to strengthen support to communal property associations. In addition, Ngutyan, I have instructed the department to convene a dedicated rural development in Daba to address systematic constraints and fast-track coordinated interventions. Comrade Matthias, Sam, through the application of the Property Valuation Act, the Office of Valuer General continues to moderate land prices in accordance with the constitutional principles. These include capping inflated valuations and preventing market speculation, thereby ensuring the public resources are used effectively and equitably. Chair, upon my appointment, I gave President my assurance that rural development would no longer remain peripheral to governance priorities. It is my commitment to ensure that it delivers meaningful impact, visible in the daily lives and lived realities of rural communities across the country. Chairperson of the committee. Honorable Boshoff, I advise you to raise your issues in the national dialogue. They seem to be very okay. Honorable Litlap, I'm sure, Doctor, you are going to change your mind just after I've informed you that we believe that the land belongs to indigenous people. And also when I have informed you that 50% of the allocated land is allocated to women. Can you change your vote now? Those were the two conditions you gave me, Doctor. We are already there. Honorable Ghana, we share your expectation that Parliament will prioritize the equitable access to land bill once formally tabled. Its timely passage is essential to advancing inclusive land access. Honorable Matlatsi, son of Africa, my comrade, a PAC member, we reaffirm our full commitment to the ongoing struggle for land restoration. This work remains central to the department's constitutional and historical mandate. Honorable Nana, we agree, accurate and accessible land data is fundamental. It enables the state to monitor progress, target interventions, and ensure accountability in land reform. Thank you very much, Comrade Mkaka Gazlam. Comrade Mutam, your assertion that the department has planned to fail is noted and appears to reflect a broader political perspective rather than the realities of ongoing institutional work. Fortunately, Parliament retains the constitutional authority to propose and enact amendments. We encourage those with such views to pursue reform through those channels. Our focus, however, remains on implementation and delivery. And you promised to teach us, and you did teach us. But in your teachings, you forgot to educate us. That how did it come about that President Zuma appointed Honorable Mulder, a Bure, in his cabinet from 2009 to 2014? You seem to be more revolutionary than all of us. No, the point is he was in the cabinet of President Zuma. It doesn't matter. The point is you can't be more revolutionary than us. We understand this thing. We have been there. By the way, you're sounding like me when I was not part of government, when I could not understand the realities inside government. What you said, we've said it long time ago, even before you come here. We understand the land question. We've been part of it. We were the only organization in 1994 that was saying land first, all shall follow. And everybody else was creating mockery out of us. The land question remained at the center of our politics. In fact, the president of the country calls it the original sin, and I called it the item of conflict. But there must be a way of resolving it. It doesn't help to come here and think that others understand land question more than others. It does not happen like that. We went to jail for this. We went to exile for this. We were hanged for this. We were mistreated for this when all others were saying, you will never get the land. By the way, others were even taking the land with a wheelbarrow and giving it to us in our organization and say, this is the land, what else do you want? Now today, you are sounding more Catholic than the Pope. Never. The land question belongs to us.
Thank you. Thank you, Honorable Minister. Honorable members, that concludes the debate and the business of this mini plenary session. The mini plenary will now rise.